Do you think this is the outcome that Sarah Vance wanted?
I don't. I would take her at her word in that letter that, she took issue with what we were writing. She perceived obviously bias in the story and she wanted that corrected. And I mean, I think she says that in her response, where she's like, thank you for addressing my concerns. I don't think Sarah Vance on a Wednesday evening was like, I'm going to take down these two papers. And I guess I don't think she thought that much about it at all.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today's guest is Jake Dye. He is the great-grandson of the former mayor of Kenai, James Dye, and has deep roots in the city on both sides of his family. Jake graduated from UAA journalism program in 2022, and shortly thereafter began work at the Peninsula Clarion. He was, for the last 3 years, the only news reporter at the Peninsula Clarion. But last night, he, along with 3 of his colleagues, resigned from the paper. So, today's episode is going to be a little bit different. You will hear the first interview that I conducted with Jake, which was on Saturday, and then you will hear the short follow-up interview that I conducted with him last night after I learned of his resignation. Some important context. The Peninsula Clarion and the Homer News are sister papers with the same corporate owner, the Carpenter Media Group. That group also owns the Juneau Empire. There is one single editor for all 3 papers, that is Erin Thompson. She also resigned last night. And to get us up to speed, here is a review of what has happened in Homer over the past 2 weeks. On September 10th, conservative political organizer Charlie Kirk was assassinated while speaking at Utah Valley University. On September 17th, hundreds of mourners gathered on the beach in Homer to remember the slain activists at a memorial service partially organized by Alaska State House Representative Sarah Vance. Homer News journalist Chloe Pleznac attended that outdoor memorial service and wrote a story about it that appeared in the September 25th paper version of the newspaper, as well as on the Homer News website. Representative Vance took offense to the coverage provided by Pleznac. In a September 25th letter to the corporate owners of Homer News, she expressed her outrage, calling out the use of terms such as far-right and Christian-Nationalist as prejudicial labels. She went on to highlight what she considers to be the historic bias of the Homer News and stated that, quote, this article represents the peak of a long-standing pattern of left-wing slant, end quote. The result was that Carpenter Media almost immediately removed Pleznac's article from the Homer News website and later replaced it with an edited version that removed Pleznac's byline. The social media commentary in both conservative and progressive circles was fierce, with folks on the right arguing that the Homer News should be ashamed of its coverage, and those on the left arguing that the unauthorized editing of Pleznac's article without input from either her or her editor, Erin Thompson, was un-American censorship. On Monday evening, September 29th, Chloe Pleznac, Erin Thompson, and our guest, Jake Dye, resigned. Jake Dye, welcome to the podcast.
Hi, yeah, excited to chat with you.
The reason why we're having the interview, the story about the Charlie Kirk memorial service in Homer, I did not get plugged into this story until after the edited version of the original story was up. So my entire perspective is informed by the fact that the first version of the story that I read was the edited version. And then when Representative Sarah Vance was doing her whole outrage about it, it was particularly hard for me to understand. Can you talk a little bit about your relationship to the story and your feelings about the story?
Yeah, I've got a lot of feelings. I've been talking a lot about this, which has been odd because, I'm doing it because I think someone needs to. And Erin is not necessarily in a position where she can speak
Erin,
out.
the editor.
Erin, my editor. And Chloe, she's going through a lot as this is all happening. And so I'm divorced from it. Like, I was aware of the story. I read the story. I told her in our group chat, like when she said she was planning on going to the event, that I was excited that she was going because I think it's important to cover. And then I was actually in Homer on Wednesday night. We were hosting a candidate forum, me, Chloe, and then Simon Lopez from KBBI, the public radio station down there, with city council candidates. And we were like setting up, and all of a sudden I see this Facebook post from Sarah Vance about the letter she sent to our bosses about this story. And I was like flabbergasted. And I even, like, my original Blue Sky post about it was like a joke. I was like, oh, Sarah Vance is doing this. Maybe she can get our corporate overlords to notice that we're up here. And then they did. And then they pulled the story, which I never would have thought was possible, because to me, that is just such a violation of our integrity as a newsroom. Carpenter Media employs Aaron to supervise these newsrooms, employs Chloe as a talented reporter in her community where she grew up as well. And they wrote a story that I still stand by. Like, the original version of the story, like, I would not ever have wanted to write a version of that story that doesn't get into, who this guy was.
I appreciate that. I have to be super careful about how I talk about this, but I'll just say that I've talked to some journalists who do not want to go public with any sort of criticism. They're very mindful of, they don't work on the Kenai Peninsula. This isn't their beat. This isn't their story. But there were some experienced journalists who said that the original version of the story, and by the way, they do not hold the reporter responsible. They hold Aaron responsible, and they say it should have been reworked. Not really saying that what Carpenter Media did was exactly the edit they would have done, but that some of the more what could be viewed as inflammatory description of Charlie Kirk should have come towards the end, and that it shouldn't have been the second sentence. I just interviewed Michael Armstrong, former editor of the Homer News. I did have a long talk with Michael about the use of the terms Christian-Nationalist and far right, because I believe in Sarah Vance's letter, she used those.
She singled out those words, and she singled out racist and controversial. And I guess where I land, especially with that, is I think criticism of the piece is absolutely valid. And Carpenter Media clearly had a problem with it. But I think the way to address that would have been to take that to Aaron and to Chloe and to ask them to write a correction. The idea of the story just being pulled from the website, which is just, I've made some big mistakes. I've not pulled a story down. Like, you write a correction, and you also clearly note this story was updated. And I usually am say this story was corrected because I misspelled a name, because I got this thing wrong. Transparency is, I think, such a big part of that. And the idea of the story disappearing and then coming up in a different form
without the reporter's name.
Without the reporter's name, which seems just like a weird change to me. I'm not sure how Chloe feels about that, but
I wondered if it was for her own protection. But again, if they're not communicating with the reporter, then how do you know?
We always don't know. But then also where I land is, and again, I think any criticism of the story is completely valid. I really liked the way Michael Armstrong put it in his Facebook comment to Sarah Vance. Anybody, including you, can complain about the coverage. But using your office as a state legislator to try and make this change is, I don't think, the right way. That should have been done. But what I mean by still standing behind the story is, I don't think, any of those words, racist, controversial, are inaccurate. Maybe they're not the ones you would have used, and maybe we should have used different ones. But I don't think the story as published was false.
The way Sarah Vance expressed it to me is that memorial service, people were crying, people were emotional. It felt very personal to them. They'd lost somebody that was very important to them personally. So when they read the article and it opened in a way that they would not have described Charlie Kirk, it felt like it was an attack on them personally.
But I think I agree with what you said about maybe having that lower down page. It's interesting to think about these two specific paragraphs that have been at sort of the heart of this firestorm. And as someone who's written a lot of stories, those two paragraphs, if I had to guess, I would say that Aaron and Chloe probably had conversations about both specifically and made the decision to include them. Or maybe sometimes even just the idea of putting it up so high, sometimes I'm just writing the story and I've got to get a draft out and I'm on deadline. And then it's off into the ether. And all of a sudden, I got a phone call just last week from Borough Mayor Peter Machicki, who was maybe a little upset about a sentence in one of my stories. And I was like, man, I didn't even
think about
I wrote that sentence. Yeah, it was just a complete nothing to me. And I don't think using the words racist or controversial would have been a complete nothing to anybody here. But we're writing a lot of stories really fast sometimes.
What you said, though, is interesting and informative, because I think the assumption that was made by at least one journalist that I spoke with was they didn't think that the editor had spent time with this piece, that the editor would have made changes. And again, they give a younger reporter a complete pass. And where I think folks are giving Erin a pass by saying she's editing 3 newspapers.
Yeah.
So maybe she didn't have her eyes on this piece enough.
Yeah, that's certainly very possible. And I know from working with Erin, like she just has an impossible amount on her plate. And some of my stories, she doesn't have a lot of time to look at. I would think that a story about Charlie Kirk, like I said, we discussed in our group chat that Chloe was going to go to this event. I would expect that Erin made sure to take the time to look at that story. I've talked to Erin a lot about this issue. We haven't spoken about the editing process. And of course, I wasn't there because I didn't write the story. Yeah.
Another thing that Michael Armstrong pointed out, and I'm just curious about your comment on it, is he said, Chloe didn't have to do this story. She didn't have to go to that event. And my understanding is that 10 minutes of a speech of Sarah Vance was available on the Homer News website. Like it was the Facebook page, like
and I think the Instagram as well. Yeah.
The Instagram. There was a lot of unedited coverage of Sarah Vance speaking, and that's a gift to the politician. You're getting a larger audience than you had at the event. And so I think from his perspective, it's like he feels that there should be some acknowledgement that the media is paying attention, and that's something that people should be grateful for.
Homer, Kenai, Soldotna are pretty conservative areas. The people who are calling me and asking me to come to their protests are the 50-51, the No Kings folks who are like, we're doing a protest, can you come take pictures? And I'm like, yeah, sure. Anytime somebody calls me and asks me to go to something, I really try to go. For whatever reason, Sarah Vance mentioned in that email, there's some sort of perception that our newspapers are maybe leaning one direction or the other, which
I think the perception is definitely leaning towards the left. That's her perspective. Yeah. I think that she felt in some ways that the coverage of the Charlie Kirk Memorial proved what everyone, quote, knew all along, which was this was a leftist newspaper.
But I guess when I see that all the time, and especially from my perspective as being in these editorial discussions, is just like bafflement. Like every claim we make, we work so hard to back up. The job is to seek the truth and report it. And I firmly believe that's what's happening in both of our newsrooms. And the idea that Chloe would have gone out of her way to go to this event, like with the perspective of smearing Charlie Kirk or anything like that, just doesn't hold water with me. I think you hear about this memorial service happening in your community, and that's newsworthy. But like I said, I wouldn't want to write and publish that story without, in no uncertain terms, spelling out a little bit of background about who this guy was.
I really wanted Sarah Vance to come on my podcast and talk about this Charlie Kirk experience from her perspective. And I wanted her to be able to talk about what Charlie Kirk meant to her and why. And she said that it wasn't good timing. She had other things going on. And then she said, but hey, so you don't feel bad about that. I'm not talking to anybody. And I guess what I would say is, look, if you're not willing to talk to the media at all, then you can't expect your voice to be heard.
Which I think has been, I'm pulling up my texts right now. Like I think Sarah Vance has responded to my text messages twice ever. Looking back now, she hasn't responded to my last 3 texts, which were in January, when she got sworn in, April, when she voted on the veto override. I mean, the Clarion and Homer News share content, and especially this recently when Juneau Empire had nobody, I was doing like the legislative coverage for all 3 of the Carpenter Alaska papers. And so I was trying to include her perspective as Homer's representative. Like she is the person who's representing Homer in the legislature. And I've got pretty solid relationships with Justin Ruffridge, Bill Elam. They
respond to your texts.
Yeah. I'm like, how do you feel about getting sworn back in? And they're like, I'm excited for another year of this. I'm excited to work on these issues. I'm like, awesome. And I include that perspective in my story. And that's not something that we're getting from her. And I think that's a shame. Like I think covering effectively the breadth of opinions and things that are happening in our community demands. I mean, she's got a powerful voice in Homer, and it's weird that it's missing.
It's an overall strategy to brand all of the media as being left-wing and untrustworthy, and not communicating with the media, period, allows for this perspective at this moment in time. unapologetically.
I think the presence of this moment makes this whole situation stick out even more to me. The week after Jimmy Kimmel gets pulled off the air for Charlie Kirk comments, Carpenter Media is pulling a story from our website for basically the same thing. You're seeing these attacks all over the country. And that's something that I tried to say in one of my Blue Sky posts was like, ABC famously got sued by Donald Trump and they settled with him for $15 million. And now he's fixing to sue them again about this Jimmy Kimmel thing. We wrote this story that Vance didn't like, not even getting into whether it was valid or not valid criticism. She sent this letter and she got the story taken down and then changed. And she did that. And I'm not sure that's going to be undone. We're still trying to figure out what we're doing internally as a newsroom about this. But why not do it again? The next time Chloe writes a story that has something that she doesn't like, she's apparently got a one-way line to John Carr. She's talked to him more than I have.
Okay, let's bounce back and learn more about you. Tell us a little bit about your early life. Where did you grow up?
I was born in Soldotna, but I really grew up and went to school in Kenai, which is 10 minutes away. And there's like a killer rivalry there that's no one's more invested in than I am. But so I was born in Soldotna, lived in Kenai, went to Sears Elementary, which doesn't exist anymore. Pour one out. And then Kenai Middle School, Kenai Central High School. And I graduated from there. I thought I was going to go into biology. I thought I was going to go into the medical field, and that didn't work out. And I flunked out of college. And in the pandemic, I discovered journalism, and kind of the rest is history.
What did your parents do?
My dad was a firefighter for a very long time. He retired, I think, in 2019, and now he works doing some sort of fire safety for Marathon out in Nikiski. So he's private sector, I'm sure making quite a bit more money than working for the city, but still doing fire safety. And my mom, she was in dentistry. She was like an assistant or a hygienist or something, but she ended up, and for most of my like adult life, she was like the office manager for the dentist she had worked at like when I was a kid. She actually recently stopped doing that. I mean, the thing about my mom is that she can't do anything by half measures. If she does anything, she gets so deep into it, which is, I think, why she ended up being like office manager for the dental office. Nowadays, since leaving the dental office, she got involved with the Elks Lodge. And 2 years later, she's the exalted ruler of the Kenai Elks Lodge now, and she's just so into it. And
I have no idea what that is. What is the Elks Lodge?
The Elks Lodge, it's like one of the fraternal orders from the last century. Like they've got this big building in Kenai that's pretty old. And she loves it. It's like very like weird, traditional. They gather and they do charity events and stuff like that. It baffles me. I don't really understand it myself, but she's digging it.
So where were you going to school for biology?
UAA. I was living in the dorms and I just was not ready to be out on my own just yet. I wasn't really taking it super seriously. So I graduated from KCHS in Kenai in 2015. By 2017, I have just thousands of dollars in debt and I've lost all my scholarships and just like properly flunked out. And so then it took a few years even before I could pay off my debts enough that I could take classes again. I moved back home with my parents in 2017. And then shortly after that, I actually ended up moving in with my now fiance. And so I was working as a lifeguard at a bunch of different pools, and I was working like 60-hour weeks at times and trying to pay off my debts. And then I tried a few things. I considered business, I considered computer science, and it was actually during the pandemic that I ended up discovering video production, working with cameras, microphones, and why I ended up picking up video producing in 2020 was because my mom got in with this pyramid scheme. It's like, buy stuff, sell stuff, but they were encouraging them to like live stream on Facebook. And she was seeing the really like high-end people doing it with all this production. And she was like, how can I do this? And so you could have shot these things on an iPhone, but I've got like capture cards and microphones. And I was like, this is so cool. And so I think I got some of that from her as far as journalism just ate up my life and it's all I think about. And I was like, wow, I think you can do a job with this, right? Like it's 2020 at this point. And so I just looked through the UAA course catalog and the journalism program at UAA. I loved it. I loved going through it, but it's a little bit of a disaster. Budget cuts over time. There used to be like different tracks. There used to be all sorts of stuff. And now it's just all big one pot. I wanted to take video editing, video producing. And the first class I ended up in was like intro to reporting, and it was taught by Larry Pursley, who was the Atwood Chair of Journalism, and I just immediately fell in love with it. In a year or two, I was at the student paper, The Northern Light, faster than I should have been. I was the executive editor over there, so it was struggling to recover from the COVID pandemic. And then I graduated in 2022. 'Cause I had credits from when I flunked out, so I really was able to just focus on journalism classes and graduate. And then by the end of that summer, I was at the Clarion, and I've been there for just over 3 years now.
So did you look for a job in Soldotna, Kenai? Did they find you?
I loved journalism. I knew that was what I wanted to do. I didn't even really have the strongest opinion of the Clarion. I hadn't even really considered it as an option, actually. Because the Northern Light at UAA was still in a rebuilding phase, they actually kept me around after I graduated. So I worked there probably until September of that year after graduating in May.
Had you read the Clarion growing up?
My dad did. I don't know that I ever had before working there. I encountered it a little bit as a journalism student because I would read work by Ashlyn O'Hara, Camille Botello, who I took Camille's job, and I'm very close with Ashlyn. But it was actually one of my professors at UAA, Paula Boncaro, who reached out to me towards the end of the summer. And she was like, "Did you know that the Clarion has an opening?" I was like, "Yeah, I'm not sure if that's what I want to do." I was waffling. And the editor at the Clarion, Aaron Thompson, called me that night because Paula had called her and been like, "I know this guy who did an
I just think
all-right
you're
job
like,
at the Northern Light."
you grew up in Soldotna, Kenai. Like, no other journalist moving to Peninsula Clarion is going to have that kind of life experience. It's just my guess.
Yeah. That's something that people told me when I started. And that's something I always like poo-pooed almost. I was, I don't know. They're like, "Oh, it's got to be such an advantage to have lived here." I'm like, I don't know if that's really true. I feel like I've got so much baggage with the community. There's too many people that I've known all my life who knew I had some struggles in middle school. And there's too many people around here who know about that. But, it does come in handy. Like a name comes up and I'm like, "Oh, yeah, like 20 years ago, remember them." Or I've got those connections. And yeah, it very quickly was like, "Oh, yeah, this is like a major advantage."
How did your parents end up in Soldotna?
They both grew up here. My mom's parents, so my maternal grandparents, moved up here in the 70s. I think shortly after my grandfather had finished serving in the Vietnam War. And so then my grandmother worked at Kenai Alternative High School for like decades. She was the secretary there. They're both retired now, but my parents both grew up here, met at Kenai Central High School, and got married. And on my dad's side, too, like my great-grandfather was mayor of Kenai in the 60s.
What was his name?
James Bud Dye. And so his name was James Glenn Dye, but everybody called him Bud. And my dad is actually named after him. My dad's James Glenn Dye II.
Very cool. I interviewed James Devens from Valdez, and his grandfather was mayor of Valdez.
Yes, yep. Yeah, I remember that. It's an interesting thing that I didn't even learn that myself until high school. There's a plaque in Kenai Central that's marking the building opening, and it's in Mayor James G. Dye. I was like, wait a sec.
I was listening to see if there was any journalism in your family, and I didn't hear any.
No, certainly not.
You seemed really interested in broadcast journalism. And since I just had Trill Gates on last week, when you were going to school in Anchorage, it seems like there would have been some opportunities if you'd wanted to explore the broadcast side. You could have.
Yeah, I ended up like almost by accident getting involved with the Northern Light at UAA, and that was print. And I think that was some of my hesitation about applying for the Clarion, was that it was print. And like I started with an interest in video, but then as I was taking classes at UAA, I was taking like podcasting. I was really interested in audio. But now, having done the Clarion for 3 years, I almost like I guess I see like the benefits and drawbacks. Like it takes so much time to
I logged in to the Clarion and was like looking at your most recent stories. You're doing a lot.
Yeah, they ask us to write at least 2 stories a day. 2 to 3 is what the big bad corporate overlords are looking for, which on one hand, that's like not a difficult thing for me to do because I'm the only news reporter in my newsroom. And
so all the news is yours. It all belongs to you.
I do. So yeah, our newsroom is our editor, Aaron. There's me in news. And then we've got a sports guy, Jeff Helminiak, who, thank God, he's been doing it for 28, 29 years now. And sports is a whole different beast that I'm so glad I don't touch at all. But so, yeah, I'm doing city councils, borough assembly, school board. I'm trying my best to plug into gavel and keep an eye on the legislature. And then arts, oil and gas, fishing, just everything. There's no shortage of things to fill that 2 to 3 story quota. But at the same time, trying to write that many stories a day, like, you're not going deep on anything. You don't have time to do that.
And something interesting, I noticed that you had a story about the bear attack at Exit Glacier and Seward. So you cover Seward.
Yeah, so that's been a fight that I've had with our corporate overlords a few times. Seward is plainly part of the Kenai Peninsula geographically, and we cover the borough assembly as the Clarion, and we've got a really close relationship with the Homer News down south. And it's just in covering the borough and covering the school board, like Seward is just like organically a part of our coverage area. And it's a really cool community that recently in 2022, they lost their newspaper, the Seward Journal. So we were trying, like, we need to do a better job of covering Seward because this is an important community. They deserve local news. And so I was doing a lot of coverage, but we couldn't get our corporate overlords to sell the paper over there. And so I was doing all the Seward coverage and people were liking it and we were getting lots of feedback.
And it wasn't being sold in Seward. That's so interesting. And I know Kat Sorensen was working for the Clarion and now is the city manager of Seward. So it seems like you've got like this in with government of the city of Seward.
I drive over there to cover local theater, like the Seward Theater Collective.
I don't understand. Why wouldn't they want to sell your newspaper in Seward? Do you know?
That kind of just gets into the whole struggle we've been having the past few years with Carpenter Media and with Sound Publishing before them. It's just like they don't really understand.
So can you explain the difference between Sound and Carpenter?
Yeah, they're sort of interchangeable to me because Sound Publishing was the company that bought the Clarion in 2017 before I started. And they just never paid attention to us. What I've heard from my editor who was here at that time was like, they just left us alone, which on one hand, we're allowed to do what we want and what we feel like is right, which is great. On the other hand, as the Clarion has been in decline, you have to do something. Like they tell us we're losing money every month. I'm like, so you got to change something then. You can't just keep doing what we're doing and think that's going to get better. But so Sound Publishing's parent company, Black Press, went into corporate insolvency in either 2023 or 2024. I'd have to check that date. And Carpenter Media bought Black Press, which then, they bought Sound.
Got it. And Black Press was based in Western Canada. Is Carpenter Media also based in Western Canada?
The Carpenter Media is based in either Mississippi or Alabama, depending on who you ask. Oh. And they're like in bed with some Canadian like private equity firms who are helping finance the purchase. I mean, the problem with Carpenter Media is that they're like completely inscrutable. Like they don't give any interviews. They hardly talk to us. And they just exploded on the scene. Like the Black Press purchase was, I think, the biggest purchase that they made. But they're like the 4th largest owner of newspapers in the country now. And they came from like nowhere 3 years ago. And so they own hundreds of newspapers all over the country, and no one from Carpenter Media has ever come to Alaska to meet us or see our location or anything like that.
I'm just trying to get caught up on the names. It was all a little bit confusing to me, but it seems like having somebody based, I guess, east of the Mississippi is not ideal.
Yeah, I would think so. Well, that's the thing. Like, what I'm doing here is local news in my community, in the community where I was born, where I've grown up. And I think that's so important. And when Carpenter Media bought us, they were like, we're so invested in local news. We're so invested in training journalists. But I've just never seen that. We have Zoom, like a company-wide Zoom. And they're like, we're interested in finding little things that are going to make a difference in your newsrooms. They're like, we visited this newsroom this one time that they didn't have a working coffee maker. Like, how can you have a newsroom without a coffee maker? Those are the small things that we're going to look for and we're going to fix. And then a month later, they had canceled our drinking water. Like they cut the contract to buy drinking water for our building.
Wow.
So Aaron and I, a lot of the times, we're the only ones in the building. Like I see Aaron, I talk to Aaron every day.
She is editing 3 newspapers simultaneously.
And yeah, the idea of her being tasked with, especially because there's no management coming from Carpenter, like she's in charge of editing and leading and managing like 3 newspapers and keeping me and Jeff at the Clarion, Chloe and Delsina Cosman and Homer, And then they just finally were able to hire someone for the Juneau Empire named Mari Carnegie. And it's just like
Mari Carnegie are all the stories at the Juneau Empire right now. But however, when I log into the Juneau Empire and go to click to contact, they don't have a reporter's contact information listed.
Carpenter, that's something I actually think that has been, it's at least started to be fixed. But yeah, Carpenter was struggling to get her even set up with an email, despite the fact that she had been working there for a week. And she's moving up to Juneau to live in Juneau like next week. She's from Washington.
Oh, so she's been doing all that reporting remotely.
Yeah.
I did notice that you had an article about Juneau, about the man dying, falling from the Mount Roberts Trail.
Yeah. So that's something you're probably familiar with, is when Mark Sabatini quit / was fired. That was like a whole mess, and started the Juneau Independent. And then he convinced all of the reporters working at the Juneau Empire to leave and go with him. There was no one. It was Aaron here in Soldotna trying to put out this newspaper.
I know. I don't know if you listened to the Trill Gates podcast, but she asks at one point how many reporters are at the Juneau Empire, and I source it and I say, according to James Brooks, 0. But I left it in there because when I went to the Juneau Empire and went to contact information, there was no reporter listed. That said, looking at the website, I'm like, there's a jillion stories here. They're all from this reporter that I've never heard of. But yeah, anyway.
Yeah, it's certainly in the rebuilding state. But that's the thing, is like all these papers have been cut bare bones. I want to say the number you mentioned in that episode was like 19 people at the Juneau Empire in the 80s. I even look at like there's an issue of the Clarion with a front page story as my high school graduation, and I'm quoted in it because I gave a speech. And like in the contact page of that paper, there's 10 names. But when I started the Clarion, there was 4 people in the newsroom.
And Homer News had 12 in their newsroom 20 years ago.
Yeah. The Juneau Empire has been around for, I think, a full century.
Yeah.
The Homer News was previously owned by one of the people who worked on
Washington Post.
Yeah, like the Watergate crisis.
Yeah.
Just this incredible history of some of these publications. The Clarion is younger, I think, than either of the other two. We've only been around since 1970, but we're the only newspaper in Kenai Soldotna, and our archives go back to 1970. And I pull from that all the time because we have a paper copy of every copy ever in our building. And I pull from that and look from that. And the idea that the Carpenter Media just would have so little respect or interest in shepherding that responsibility. And I think it's ultimately that you can't trust a big corporation to shepherd local news in any community.
When I had Ryan Binkley on, I think that there was like some assumptions that I made about just newspaper business not being profitable. But what he says is that they wouldn't be putting out the Anchorage Daily News, period, if it wasn't turning a profit. It's turning a profit. According to Michael Armstrong, Homer News was the most profitable property in the Sound enterprise. And so I guess the thing is that, like, it may suck that they cut off your drinking water or they're not supplying with drinking water, but I guess you're still making a profit. That's why you're there.
Thing that they tell us is that we aren't. Like, I threw a fit earlier this year. There was this whole snafu where they tripled our insurance premiums, and I was like, what are we doing here? And so John Carr, who is like a corporate VP somewhere in Carpenter Media, told me that we were losing $17,000 a month at the Clarion alone. And when I met Mary Kennis, who's our current publisher, in a Zoom meeting in April, I threw that number at her and she confirmed it. But that number is also inflated because they're charging us like rent for our building, which we own. They're charging us weird management fees. So it's hard to tell really where profit and loss is. If on paper, if as far as Carpenter is concerned, we're losing $17,000 a month, the question I keep asking is then why are we still here?
Exactly.
And you do something to change it. You could do, that's why I would almost respect a move like a layoff, because it would show some sort of strategy. It seems like we're just sitting here and maybe the corporation's so big we're a rounding error and nobody notices us, but I just struggle with that explanation.
Michael Armstrong, he talked about the importance of local media, and he's like, look, the things that people in small communities want to know, they want to know who got arrested. They want to know who has died. They want like local sports information. In Homer, they want to know the ferry schedule. And that's how the newspaper stays relevant and stays in the community, working for the community. And when I was reviewing your stories, there's like the Halloween is coming, like they are community focused. I guess maybe I didn't dig deep enough, but like, how often are you writing like a big news story as opposed to more of a community interest story?
Yeah, it's almost feast or famine sometimes. You were just looking at like my recent stories. There just hasn't been like an assembly meeting or a city council meeting in a while. There are times where there's a lot more happening and there's times when there's less happening. What I think that I'm missing is a lot of like deeper, fully reported investigative stuff. Anybody can listen to an assembly meeting and write what happened. That's easy. But a couple months ago, there was, as part of the whole school budget crisis, there was all of these jobs that the school district wasn't sure if they were going to be able to keep, specifically pool managers, which if they went away, the whole pool would go away. Library aides, which despite the term aide in some schools, they're the only librarian. And if they went away, the library would be expected to close. And theater techs, and same thing. If they go away, the theater is expected to close. And all of these positions ended up being funded after the funding came out late June or July. They sent all of these people these letters that were like, your job is terminated, your insurance ends on this day. And the school district was like, officially, these people are all just in this limbo state. But I'm like, you told this woman who works for you and has worked for you for decades that she doesn't have a job anymore. And she has a letter that says that, despite the fact that we all hope she gets rehired. But she's in an awful spot right now, and nobody knows what it means. And so that was a story where I was able to do interviews in Seward, Kenai, and Nikiski, and wrote like a bigger story. But that's, yeah, not something that I've got a ton of time for.
Because it feels like that a lot of your time would be eaten up by having to file 2 stories a day. You can't spend 4 days researching one story when you're trying to put out 2 stories a day.
Helps that not every story is created equal. Like you mentioned, the bear story I wrote.
Yeah.
That one's kind of a special case because I wrote that like in the midst of everything that happened this week, and it's 5 inches of copy long, and there's nothing there. That took me 10 minutes in between angry phone calls with my coworkers. And that's one of my 2. And like the Halloween thing, gathering, looking through all sorts of Facebook events. And I know that every year Kenai Aviation drops a pumpkin out of a plane. Like I know to look for that. That takes a little more time to collect. But if those 2 stories take, just throw out 15 minutes for the bear, 2 hours for Halloween, I've got almost 6 hours left in my day to ostensibly use for something maybe more interesting if I'm not trying to pick a fist fight with my corporate overlords.
So you've been pretty outspoken about this particular issue, and other journalists haven't. So I was just curious about your comfort level in doing that and whether that in any way blows your nonpartisan objectivity as a journalist.
Yeah, I think part of it is maybe that I've not been in like a fully structured newsroom. No one's telling me what to do. Carpenter Media don't know who I am. I feel like I try to post a lot on Blue Sky and on Twitter back before it changed. I think if I want to have a path forward doing journalism in this state, like I need people to see me and see my work. And social media, people aren't getting the paper, that's for sure. So social media is, I think, the only way I can share my perspective and share my work. And then with something like this, as far as what you were saying about like objectivity is, I think that we as journalists in this state, I've been really frustrated with some of the stuff that's been done. I'm not seeing a lot of exciting efforts to improve journalism in the state. And there's some organizations, the Alaska Press Club, the Alaska News Coalition, that have cool people involved, but I think we need to be so much louder about why this matters. And that's why I've been so excited to hear folks talk on your podcast, because I've not heard James Brooks talk about why he thinks this matters before. And yeah, I think I was so outraged by the violation of our integrity in this move. And like I said, I think complaints are completely valid. What happened isn't. I think we need to stand up for ourselves. And I really stand by that.
I think what I'm hearing, you are the journalist at the Peninsula Clarion. And so many of the folks that I've interviewed over the years who were journalists at the ADN or the Anchorage Times in the 80s, they were in newsrooms with lots of reporters and they were mentored. There was a lot more like hands-on, but who's going to be hands-on with you? There's no other reporters there.
Yeah, that's something I've been so frustrated with. Even when I started at the Northern Light, like I said, I very quickly became the executive editor. I was the person making decisions. And I was at one time one of two people working there. So it was me ostensibly supervising this one reporter. And I've got no idea even what I should be covering because I started at the Northern Light when it was in ruins. So I'm like embarrassed of some of the stories I wrote. I was just trying to figure things out. At one point, I was writing these video game reviews, and Paula Boncaro, the professor who has been a really positive force in my life, she sent me an email. She's like, "Do people really want a full page story about this?" And I was like, "Do they not? Can you tell me? Because I don't know." I truly would love if someone could tell me what I should be doing, how I should be trying to grow. And then at the Clarion, like I said, I look up to some of these big names in the space, but I've never sat down with James Brooks. I've never sat down with Larry Pursley, even though he's my teacher. I don't have a reporter to look up to or who can be like, "Oh, you didn't do a great job in this story, and here's why." The journalism space, I think, in the state is weird and cliquey almost. Like the Alaska Public Media is so cool. And of course, they're nonprofit and they've got an awesome mission about doing community reporting. But they're also a little bit of an insular group. I'd love to see that model grow. There's no room for me right now, but
the problem with their federal funding cut is
they're in their own rocky waters.
Yeah.
And I've been helping out this summer at KDLL, which is the public radio station in Kenai, and they lost a reporter because of the federal funding cuts. There are less journalism jobs than there was at the start of this year. There might be less next year. I think something big has to happen in the state to try and turn that around. And I think part of the problem is like the Alaska Beacon is so cool. They're like three people, right?
They're like three people. And I think, I don't remember exactly, but when you said you had to do 2 stories a day, didn't James Brooks say that they had to do 2 to 3 stories a week?
That's definitely right. Yeah, I've heard him say that before.
And I guess that kind of brings us to just the media environment in general. From your perspective as a newer reporter, 3 years on the job at the Peninsula Clarion, what are your thoughts on media in Alaska?
I think it's just a profoundly difficult time. It's completely gotten swamped away by this whole Sarah Vance situation. But a month ago in August, Carpenter Media sent us a letter that said that starting November 1st, they wouldn't have to pay us out our vacation hours. Like they were changing the way the benefits work. And like I said, we've been operating for years, being told that we're working in a deficit. I'm seeing my building, like the lights are going out. We don't go in one of the rooms that used to be Jeff Helminiak's office because like the leaks and the roof is coming in. On November 2nd, are you going to shut down the Clarion? Like maybe. I'm looking for jobs. I am not in any illusion or misconception that the Peninsula Clarion has another 50 years. I don't think. I haven't seen any reason to believe that there's another 50 years in this publication. The problem is there's certainly no jobs on the Kenai Peninsula.
Right.
I mean, if I could get to Anchorage, but I'm stuck on the Kenai Peninsula because my fiance has a job. Her dad's in a home here. We're planning a wedding. We're planning to get married here in Nikiski in just over a year, October 3rd next year. We're tied to this place.
You don't have to like disclose your salary, but when I interviewed Larry Pursley, he talked about paying $52,000 to his journalist in Wrangell. Is that like the ballpark of what you make?
I make $20 an hour.
That's about $40,000 a year if you're not making overtime.
Mm-hmm. And they're cracking down on overtime. And like I said, this year our insurance premiums tripled.
That's terrible.
It's not great, but I'm still doing it despite declining working conditions, right, despite the pay, because I think it's so important for our communities. But yeah, so like looking broadly, if I don't think Carpenter Media, especially this week, has proven themselves in the past year and a half since they bought the Clarion and Homer News, Juneau Empire. They certainly haven't proven themselves, an interested shepherd of these institutions in our communities. And that's why you saw everybody quit the Juneau Empire and start the Juneau Independent. And I would love to see something like that happen in Kenai.
That was something that one of the journalists said. And interestingly, this journalist was coming from the perspective that he just didn't think the Homer News was thriving. And so he really felt like, Honestly, maybe we just let this whole thing just fold and let's start something fresh from the ground up. Let's create our own nonprofit news organization from the ground up and get out of this for-profit model with these hedge fund investor types thousands and thousands of miles away. That's not working anymore.
And I agree so completely with that. Like I said, the Clarion, the Homer News, like Carpenter Media can't do it. Something else needs to happen. And that's why something I say a lot because I read it in a book. The book was called Hedged. It's about the way hedge funds have destroyed newspapers. And they quoted this reporter, I want to say from like Florida. And he was like, this community doesn't need something called the Peninsula Clarion. This community needs local news. And if it were up to me, I would never work for a for-profit company again, because I think what matters to me is the local service, the civic engagement, sharing fun pictures of kids succeeding in sports. And that's not Carpenter Media's priority. But also, journalism's really expensive. You've got to pay me to report. You've got to pay insurance because I need my prescriptions and just everything else, legal support, like all sorts. It's a big thing. And so if somebody were to start a nonprofit newsroom on the Kenai Peninsula, I would be the first person in line. But I'm not sure where that money is going to come from. I'm not sure that I've seen the support from our communities for that. I've been working at the Clarion for 3 years. There's less ads than there was before. I don't get the impression that a lot of people are subscribing. I don't even get feedback on a lot of my stories, but I just keep showing up and writing them and hoping that I'm making a difference.
I think the fact that there's folks in Homer talking about the need for a different model of a nonprofit news organization, and maybe there is like some sort of way of incorporating all of the Kenai Peninsula. Do you have anything to say about Seward Folly?
Yeah, I'm actually working with them a little bit. I mentioned we're doing these candidate forums. We've done them. This is our 4th year. We travel to all the communities. We host all of the city council folks. And since the Seward Folly started, which was directly a response to Carpenter Media failing to sell the paper over there, I've pulled back on Seward coverage because they're doing great stuff. Michael Armstrong, I probably mentioned to you that he's helping them out with city council stuff.
Yes.
I've spoken a few times with the guy who's running it, Bob Barnwell, and his wife, Mary Lynn Barnwell. And then I just met their other reporter, Dr. John Fraser, who works at the Alaska Sea Life Center, and he's just so cool. Yeah, I think there's exciting things happening over there.
Right. So I feel like in a way that's almost like a model. Like the newspaper went away and local folks had to figure out a way to provide some sort of coverage. And it may not be the very best it could be yet, but they're figuring it out.
I've listened to every episode of your media series, and something that's been a recurring theme has been like spouses subsidizing journalism careers, which they don't pay movie theater managers that much either. My fiance is not in a position to subsidize me. And that's something that I'm thinking about. I don't know what's going to happen to the Clarion or the Homer News. Like I said, we're still trying to figure out internally what our response is going to be about all this. But there's a 911 dispatcher job that pays $30 an hour that I could maybe get and then write on the side. Yeah, the idea, I don't see a lot of a future, I guess, for being able to do full-time reporting in this community. But I'm open to options, and I'm looking to do whatever is available to me and to the folks that I know who are equally interested in continuing to do journalism in this community in the future.
That concludes my interview with Jake from Saturday. And here is our interview from last night. Jake Dye, welcome back to the podcast.
Yeah, great to be here. You know, a lot has changed in just a couple days.
Yeah. So talk me through what happened.
The situations have not been great. I've been in a not ideal place for a while. I mean, I've been in a position where I've been thinking probably before the end of the year, I need to step away for all sorts of stuff. And yeah, so what happened with everything that's been going on with the Saravant situation and our company failing to stand up for our work, changed a lot of things for everyone else who works at the Peninsula Clarion and the Homer News. And yeah, so we spoke Saturday afternoon, and it was actually late Saturday evening that I got a call from my editor, and she was like, I think what I'm going to do is I'm going to resign. Like, after what happened, I don't think I can keep doing this. And I mean, I took absolutely zero convincing. I was there. And she had been in talks a lot with Jeff Hominiak, who's our sports editor, sports and features editor, who also resigned. And they both were together when they called me, and they were like, we're both going to do this. And I was like, I want to do this. And then the next day we called Chloe. And I mean, my understanding is she pretty quickly was like, yeah, I'm going to do this
So
as well.
you were the four people resigning?
Yeah, we're the 4 people resigning. So then that leaves at the Homer News, 1 reporter, Delsina Cosman, who for her own situation, she can't step away at this time. And then there is a reporter at the Juneau Empire named Mari Carnegie, who was supposed to
moving up.
I mean, yeah, the plan is for her to move up later this week, and I think Aaron's trying to get in touch with her, spell out the situation. But the situation's kind of evolving really fast for us too. I mean, we put out that letter at about between 4 and 5 today, and just after we texted, so like a little after 6 o'clock, we realized that they had already locked us all out of our email addresses or email accounts.
Wow.
So, I mean, yeah, in our letter, we offered to work a full 2-week notice. This work's important to us. These publications are important to us. And I mean, we actually haven't even heard anything from Carpenter yet. Like Erin, even before I sent out the letter, she sent that same letter to Mary Kemmis, and we never got a response. We just, Erin texted me and was like, hey, I can't get into my email. What about you guys? And yeah, so I mean, and they haven't said a word. Like, I guess they don't want us to come in tomorrow. I mean, I've got to.
So you
keep the
assume
building, but
they accept your resignation if they've locked you out of your email, but
I
there's
mean, you have
no
to assume
communication. That's
Yeah.
crazy.
I'm not sure how last check's gonna work. I've got a mileage expense report that I was supposed to file tomorrow. I mean, yeah, we're quickly in uncharted territory.
Well, if you don't mind me asking, what's your plan?
So I, don't really have one. Something that a lot of folks have been asking today. I mean, especially, you look at the Juneau Empire where everybody quit and started the Juneau Independent. I mean, we just don't have a plan like that. Erin's been editing 3 papers. She's been working really hard for a long time. I think she's got some burnout. I think she wants to step away. Jeff's been at the Clarion for like 28, 29 years. I mean, I don't think he would say it out loud, but I think he's ready to step away. Like I said in our previous discussion, if someone wants to do something interesting on the Kenai Peninsula, I'll be first in line, but I don't have those resources. I don't have anything in place. And I guess that's what worries me about the situation is, I absolutely feel really strongly about our decision to leave, but that leaves, 4 journalists gone from the Kenai Peninsula in a space that's shrinking really rapidly. I mean, KDL
Right.
lost a reporter this year.
So there's 1 reporter left doing news at Homer News, and she will now cover the entire peninsula. She'll do stories about Kenai, Soldotna, Seward.
I mean, I have no idea what that's supposed to look like. I think in a perfect world, she wouldn't be made to do that. What I would hope is that, she's a reporter at the Homer News specifically. So I would hope that no one would try and make her do anything for the Clarion or for the Juneau Empire. One person doing it is hard to imagine.
Right. I mentioned the fact that I spoke to some more senior journalists about what had happened. And one of them had said, like, hey, we probably just need this whole thing to just crash and burn, and we need to start something new, a nonprofit, a different model. But I think those things tend to work better when there's a plan and you have time to get your ducks in a row. It's happening now.
Yeah. I guess I feel a little bit of hope that something might happen within the next year. People have been texting me, reaching out today about, is anybody doing this? I'm like, no, but I'd love it if someone did. Like, there seems to be folks who are interested in something like that happening. And I'm certainly not going anywhere. I'm, going to keep my ears open and hopefully be a part of, because the Kenai Peninsula is a big community with a lot of great stories to tell, and someone's got to tell them.
Okay, so crystal ball moment.
Mm-hmm.
Like, do you think Carpenter Media is going to try to, like, lure some unsuspecting folks to Kenai? Like, I mean, are they going to try to replace you?
I just don't. I mean, that's something we wrote in our letter that we sent out. It's like, we want to do 2-week notice. We hope that Carpenter invests in this community and restaffs these papers, which have, pretty incredible legacies to themselves. I mean, they've not invested in these publications in the last year and a half. I don't know why that would change, especially now. Ostensibly, they've got a Peninsula Clarion on Friday and a Homer News on Thursday. And especially because of everything that happened. I mean, it's not like they even have my work in the tank for this next paper that they could use to fill that. Like, I don't know what that paper would look like if it's still coming out on Friday. And it probably has to come out on Friday because I'm sure they've sold ads. I'm sure they've sold legals and public notices. I've got absolutely no idea what's going to happen. And I guess I expected we'd be part of that conversation.
And again, looking in your crystal ball, do you think this is the outcome that Sarah Vance wanted?
I don't. I would take her at her word in that letter that, she took issue with what we were writing. She perceived, obviously, bias in the story, and she wanted that corrected. And I mean, I think she says that in her response, where she's like, thank you for addressing my concerns. I would be willing to take at face value that she was at that level operating in good faith. I don't think Sarah Vance on a Wednesday evening was like, I'm going to take down these two papers. And I guess I don't think she thought that much about it at all. Like, I'm sure she read this story, was upset, put this thing together and sent it out. And I doubt she expected it to be what it's been in the past week.
Well, it makes me sad just because there are folks in our current environment that is, America, fall 2025, that'll be like, oh, 2 more newspapers crash and burn. Good.
Mm-hmm. Oh, I mean, yeah, somewhere out there, someone's writing "Go woke, go broke" in like the KSRM comment section. I always think that sort of stuff is kind of frustrating because I listened to Michael's interview this morning, and I really thought I connected with what he was saying about objectivity. And even in college, I pushed back on the idea of objectivity because just like plainly, like human beings, like unfortunately, a person has to write this stuff. And we've all experienced things and we all have opinions. And it's the work that we're doing that I perceive as being where, the truth comes from. I push back on the word objectivity because nothing's objective. But I think we work hard to bring in multiple perspectives to write a balanced story that doesn't earn the allegations of bias that Sarah Vance brought forward on Wednesday.
Well, Jake Dye, I wish you the very best of luck. I'm super grateful for you coming back on to the podcast to give us an update before your episode comes out in the morning.
Yeah, absolutely.
I'm worried about journalism on the Kenai Peninsula, but fingers crossed something works out.
Yeah, I think there's people who are interested in finding a solution, and hopefully I'll get to be a part of it.
Do you have a book to recommend?
Yeah, I just finished 2 days ago, just a couple days ago, as this was all kind of exploding. It was the night that the letter came from Sarah Vance. I finished Fahrenheit 451, which I had picked up just by chance at River City Books here in Soldotna. And as I said, I'm so hyper-fixated on journalism, and I'm seeing all these attacks and changes across the country, and maybe now's the time to read this. And Fahrenheit 451 is a little more about books being replaced by TV and movies, but damn, that's a page turner. I really cooked through that thing, and it's really good. You hate to find out that classic
Ray
literature
Bradbury
is actually classic. Yeah, Ray Bradbury, very good. A little bit inspiring. It's about a man who burns books, starts talking to his neighbor, and she's got like a curiosity for the world that kind of sparks something in him.
Hey, thanks so much for being on the show.
Yeah, thanks for taking the time to chat with me.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akleg.gov or call 907-269-0123.